and welcome to the video lecture for the endocrine system or the hormonal system. I think I told you guys already how much I find the hormonal system really super interesting. Again though, I feel like I might be overusing that word because I talk about all the body systems like I think they're so interesting, and I really do. But the hormonal system is really cool because there's all these hormones that get sent out in the body that tell our bodies to do certain things. And then there's other hormones that go out and tell the body to stop doing those certain things. So everything in the hormonal system is kind of like on a balance. When we end up with like overproduction of a certain hormone or underproduction of a certain hormone, it can really affect the entire body. So this is a very interesting system for that. I do feel though like our lecture for this is a little bit dry. So I have here just the endocrine system information sheet. So this is posted on your .net, but I also have like kind of an abbreviated version in our test 4 notes, and I'm just going to kind of summarize these for you here now. So we've got 7 major endocrine glands. For the locations of these, there is a little diagram you can see in your textbook. It's page 95, and it's figure 4-25. So the major endocrine glands include the pituitary gland, the thyroid, the parathyroid, the adrenal, the pancreas, the thymus, and the gonads. The gonads include the ovaries and the testes. So in most animals, they're going to have one or the other. So let's talk about the pituitary gland first, because the pituitary is the master gland. And you'll see why right away we call it the master gland. This kind of gives it away. It controls the function of many other glands. So this guy is located on the underside of the brain, and it makes lots of different hormones. So here's a whole list of them, okay? So there is growth hormone. It's also called somatotropin. Growth hormone stimulates growth. We also have thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid to make its hormones. Then there's follicle stimulating hormone. This hormone stimulates the follicles. So remember we talked about in the ovaries it has little follicles with eggs, and then when the animal ovulates, that follicle ruptures and then releases the egg. In males, they have follicles as well that are making the sperm. So follicle stimulating hormone stimulates those follicles to produce their gametes. Luteinizing hormone, we can see that this one stimulates the female reproductive system. It stimulates the production of estrogen and progesterone. ICSH, it stands for interstitial cell stimulating hormone. So interstitial cells are part of the testicles. So this stimulating hormone stimulates production of testosterone in the male. ACTH stands for adrenocorticotropic hormone. This stimulates the adrenal gland to produce its hormones. ADH is an anti-diuretic hormone. This stimulates water reabsorption by the kidneys. And then oxytocin is a hormone that stimulates ejection of milk and stimulates contractions of the uterus during parturition or during birth. So do you notice a common word in all of these hormones? It's stimulate. If you see stimulate in any of the hormones, you know it's coming from the pituitary gland. Okay, so that's kind of my easy cheat here. So pituitary equals stimulate. And that's why it's the master gland. It kind of bosses around all the other glands. So moving on, we have the thyroid. So thyroid is like such a cute little gland. Here, I'm just gonna write thyroid. So it says butterfly shaped, but I like to think of it as more of a bow tie because it's right on the neck, like right where the voice box is and like the trachea, etc. It's right on the throat, right where you would kind of wear a bow tie, right? So it is in the throat. It is responsible for things like regulating metabolism, and it's really reliant on iodine, okay? So maybe you've heard of people having like goiters, and that's due to an iodine deficiency. So the thyroid makes a couple different hormones. It secretes thyroid hormone. So it makes T4 and T3. T4 is the one that we do blood tests for the most. We can do T4 tests right in clinic to see if there's a problem with the thyroid gland. Thyroid hormone is responsible for growth and metabolism. So if we have an animal that has way too much thyroid hormone, so they're hyperthyroid, we're going to see that their growth and metabolism is really cranked up. So cats get hyperthyroidism at a fairly frequent rate as they age. And these guys will end up so skinny. They will eat all the time and they will constantly be meowing for more food, and they will continue to lose weight. That's because their metabolism is kicked into high gear because of that excess of the T4 hormone. On the flip side, if we're not producing enough T4, we're going to see that metabolism be really slow. So the animal might not even really be eating very much, and they'll probably be gaining weight too. That happens more in dogs. It also makes calcitonin. And calcitonin decreases blood calcium levels. So it does that by getting the bones to absorb calcium. So our next gland then that we're going to talk about is the parathyroid. So para meaning near, it's near the thyroid, and in fact it's right on top of the thyroid. So if the thyroid is the bow tie, the parathyroid are these 4 little glands that are the polka dots on the bow tie. How stinking cute is that, hey? So parathyroid makes parathyroid hormone. Or PTH. So parathyroid hormone is like the opposite of calcitonin. So it's going to increase blood calcium levels. So calcitonin and parathyroid are antagonists. They work against each other. Okay, so they do different and opposite things. And that's the only hormone that parathyroid makes. So that one's kind of easy to remember. Parathyroid makes parathyroid hormone. So moving on, we have our adrenals. The adrenals are located right above the kidney. So ad meaning towards, right? And rene meaning kidney. So these are like if the kidney, hold on. If kidneys are like our little bean-shaped organ, the adrenals are like their hat. They're just right on top. So the adrenal we talk about in 2 different parts because there's 2 parts of the adrenal that make different things. So we talk about the adrenal cortex, which is the outer portion, and the adrenal medulla, which is the inner. So I'll write that one down in a minute. So the cortex produces a few different hormones. It produces your mineralocorticoids, which are things like our aldosterone. These regulate sodium, potassium, and water balance. Then we have our glucocorticoids. So that is, another word for that one is cortisol. So cortisol, maybe you guys have heard cortisol equals the stress hormone. Have you heard that before? It's a little bit simplified, but animals or humans that are experiencing long-term stress tend to have higher levels of cortisol in their bodies than animals that are not experiencing chronic stress. So cortisol tends to be called that stress hormone. Cortisol is a pretty wild hormone because it affects all cells. Every cell in the body is going to be affected by cortisol. The main areas of influence are going to be in metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So, processing and digesting those. It affects the resistance to stress. It affects antibody formation. So if you have a lot of cortisol in your body, it can prevent antibody formation. So sometimes that might be a good thing. You might take a steroid. So these are steroids, by the way. You might take a steroid to suppress your immune system. Maybe like if you have like an allergic reaction or something, that would be a good thing. But if you are a person or an animal experiencing a lot of stress, so you have high levels of cortisol, that antibody formation being decreased means that your immunity is decreased as well. And that can be dangerous, right? It affects lymphatic function. It affects recovery from injury. So sometimes it takes longer to recover from a wound. And it does reduce inflammation. So we'll give steroids as a way of treating inflammation. But we can see that we don't want to do that for too long because there are a lot of negative side effects to those steroid drugs. And then the cortex also produces sex hormones, which are called the androgens. So estrogen and testosterone, basically, it's going to make a little bit of both in all animals. So even if you're a female, you're going to have testosterone in your body thanks to your adrenal cortex. Even if you're a male, you're going to have estrogen in your body because of your adrenal cortex. It's important to have both hormones. We'll learn a little bit later when we're talking about the sex organs the sex glands, I guess, that they produce estrogen and testosterone in much higher levels associated with either being male or female. But we'll get into that a little later on. So testosterone and estrogen are going to be present in both male and female animals thanks to the cortex. And then we also have the adrenal medulla. So this is the inside portion. So it makes epinephrine, which is AKA adrenaline. It also makes norepinephrine and noradrenaline. Those guys work kind of hand in hand to do the same thing. So basically, we've probably all heard of adrenaline before. Adrenaline helps us to meet a stressful situation. So it's going to do things like increase your heart rate, increase your respiratory rate. Maybe you've heard about like mothers where their kids are trapped under a car and adrenaline helps them to lift the car. It's a pretty amazing hormone. So this is really big in the fight or flight reaction. Okay, so epinephrine you can think of as the flight or fight hormone. Okay, so let's move on to the pancreas. Wait, the pancreas? That sounds familiar. I feel like we talked about the pancreas before. And yes, we did. The pancreas is involved in digestion, right? So the pancreas is what puts out those digestive enzymes. So the protease, which digests the protein, the amylase, which digests the carbohydrates, and the lipase, which digests the fat. So that is the exocrine function of the pancreas. So that means it makes those things and puts them out into another organ. The endocrine function of the pancreas means that it makes hormones that go into the bloodstream. So the pancreas makes two different hormones and they're both involved in blood glucose. So it makes insulin and it makes glucagon. So insulin is going to decrease blood sugar. And glucagon increases blood sugar. So let's talk about the how and why. So insulin, how it decreases blood sugar is it gets the cells to absorb glucose from the blood. So insulin basically, like if the cell is a locked door, it's locking out the glucose. Insulin acts as the key that opens up that door for glucose to get into the cell. And then the cell can use that glucose for energy. So insulin's basically the key there. Glucagon, on the flip side, is going to help increase blood sugar levels. So it does that in a couple ways. So first, it stimulates the liver to release stored glucose. So the liver can store excess glucose, and then glucagon can tell it to release it. Glucagon also converts protein or fat into glucose. So those are two ways that it can create glucose basically in the blood, increasing the blood sugar levels. Okay, so these two, like the parathyroid hormone and calcitonin, these guys are like antagonists. They do the opposite things of each other. Okay, and then we got two more to go, not too many. We've got the thymus. The thymus is just in young animals. It disappears by the time the animal is sexually mature. It is located in the chest cavity. It's near the heart. The thymus is responsible for making thymosin. And thymosin matures T cells. And T cells are part of the immune system. So it makes sense that the thymus would disappear as you get older, because your immune system typically gets stronger and stronger as you get older and have been exposed to more illnesses. So once you have adequate amounts of antibodies, you don't need as many active T cells. So thymosin matures T cells. This is involved in immunity. And the thymus is in young animals only. Okay, I guess I could leave this here. And then lastly, we have our gonads. So gonads are responsible for making the gametes, so the sperms and the eggs, but they also make hormones that are really used a lot in the reproductive system. So we have two different types of gonads. The first is the ovary. Ovaries are generally present in the female animal. Ovary makes estrogen. And estrogen makes secondary. Remember that 2 with the degree sign means secondary. Sex characteristics. So things like developing mammary tissue, things like that. It also preps the uterus for a potential embryo. So it makes that endometrium nice and juicy, right? So that embryo can implant in it. It also makes progesterone. So progesterone has similar functions. It kind of contributes to these things as well, but its main job is maintaining pregnancy. So the estrogen is typically the predominant hormone during the first part of the estrous cycle. So remember, ESTROUS, estrous cycle is the cycle. It's typically going to be in higher levels up until ovulation. Once ovulation happens, estrogen levels drop and progesterone takes over to maintain that pregnancy, assuming that there is one. If there is not a pregnancy, progesterone starts to taper off, and then estrogen picks it up again to prepare the uterus again for another embryo. Okay, and then the testicle is in the male, and it makes testosterone. So testosterone, like estrogen, is responsible for the secondary sex characteristics in males. So like one example would be male cats that have those big tomcat cheeks if they haven't been neutered. That's a secondary sex characteristic. So it makes them more attractive to the female cats. And then as well, testosterone influences muscle and bone growth. So we saw back when we were talking about the adrenal medulla that, the adrenal cortex, that the cortex also makes those androgen hormones, so like testosterone and estrogen in both male and female animals. And it makes sense, right, that we would need muscle and bone growth in both animals. So we do have testosterone present in both. Also, it makes sense then that in a good majority of mammal species, the male tends to be larger than the female, and that's because they have more testosterone. Okay, so both male and females are going to have that base level of estrogen and testosterone. If you're a female, you're going to have an extra amount of estrogen because you have ovaries. They're going to give you your secondary sex characteristics that make the body present female. It's also going to be responsible for, you know, like reproductive tasks. In the male, you're going to have both the base levels of estrogen and testosterone, but having the testicles present cranks up that testosterone, gives the secondary sex characteristics of the male, and then also, because of that extra level, makes the muscles and the bones grow more so than in the female. So we do tend to see, generally, it's just a generalization, but for the most part, across species, in mammals, the male will be larger than the female. I mean, obviously, we're all going to know examples where that's not the rule. It's an exception, but a general rule that does apply. Okay, so we've basically summarized for you here the endocrine system. So my tip for you for studying purposes for this is to go ahead and make a study chart. I think a study chart is a great way to study these. So you want to label gland, location, so where is it, what hormone or hormones are produced by it, and the hormone's function. I have an example that a student had saved for me that she had made in a past class. So that's what hers looked like, right? So some of them are small because they only make like the thymus just has the one that you have to know about. But pituitary has lots on there because they all do different things. So this was her study chart. Okay, and I think it's super helpful. Making the chart alone is going to be helpful for you, and then being able to study off it is going to be helpful for you as well. So that's my recommendation for you. As well, you can read your Elsevier textbook, pages 94 to 97. Your McBride textbook covers the endocrine system in chapter 13. All right, so if you do have any questions for the endocrine system, please always ask. So virtual classroom, you'll find me there. You can find me in the chat. You can also send me an email anytime. Thanks so much for listening about the endocrine system, and have a great day. Bye.